Hi, my name is Matt Schelkopf. I'm an attorney here at the law firm of Sauder Schelkopf. I'm also involved in the Hyundai engine failure cases, specifically the connecting rod bearing failure within the rotating assembly of certain Hyundai and Kia vehicles. The first case was what we refer to as Engine 1, which dealt with the Theta 2 engines with the GDI, gasoline direct injection type of fuel injection. And now we're in the preliminary approval, headed towards final approval in September of 2023 with the Engine 2 litigation, which involves some of the NPI engines and also some of the NU engines with connecting rod bearing failure within the rotating assembly. So through the course of those litigations, I've talked to and also corresponded with numerous class members, definitely in the thousands, probably in the tens of thousands by this point, about different issues that they have with their engines and just overall explanation of the class action settlement and the relief that they can obtain through the settlement. So I just wanted to do a short video, kind of address some of the most common, most frequently asked questions that I get. The first one is the class action settlements offer both a warranty extension and then also a reimbursement or claim for reimbursement. So the two methods are to get the warranty extension, and really the warranty extension, just like if you were to buy an extended warranty when you buy a car, or if your car came with a warranty, all that is doing is protecting against something that may happen at a future point in time. And if it were to happen, then the theory is that it would be repaired under the warranty. So under the extended warranty, generally speaking, again, refer to the specific settlement notices, but generally speaking, you need to get the KSDS update, the KSDS update. And so what the KSDS update is essentially it's allowing a knock sensor to listen to your engine for connecting rod bearing failure. There's no other modifications that are necessarily made to your engine, but really what it wants to do, or the intent behind it, is to prevent engine stalls and promote the safety of people who own these vehicles. So what we were seeing before the KSDS update was you would have a sudden engine stall. No warning lights, nothing, the car would just stop. So with the KSDS update, that specific item, the sensor, and it's really just a kind of a knock sensor that listens for a different frequency of the engine. If it hears a certain frequency that coincides with potential connecting rod bearing failure, it allows the vehicle to go into limp mode. And so what that means is it reduces that chance of an engine stall. Instead, it decreases the power, allows a person to drive still to, in theory, a dealership where the vehicle can get repaired. So, and you wouldn't have to experience that stalling event and like some other people have experienced fire events. So the KSDS update is something that you want to get on your vehicle if you have not done it yet. It's at no cost. It's at a Hyundai or Kia dealership, depending on which vehicle you own. The other question I get is the reimbursement. What needs to be done for that? Again, refer to the specific notices for the reimbursement. But in general, you file a claim for reimbursement of prior out-of-pocket expenses. Okay? So if at the time that notice went out in the class action settlement, a year ago or 2 years ago, you had paid for an engine replacement out of pocket, you could now submit your documentation and file a claim to seek reimbursement for that out-of-pocket expense. Whereas if you experience an engine failure, for example, 6 months from now, and you're within the warranty period, the mileage limitation, then you could present it to a Hyundai Kia dealership, and that engine would, in theory, again, be replaced at no cost to you. You wouldn't have to file a claim for it. So the other question that I get so frequently that I really want to focus on in this video to help explain is people contact us and say, I'm experiencing oil consumption. Why isn't it covered under the lawsuit? And so we're going to go down into our workshop. I have a Hyundai Kia engine that I have torn apart, and we're going to walk through the differences between what this class action or these class action lawsuits are about in terms of the connecting rod bearing failure within the rotating assembly, as opposed to what some people see in their vehicles as oil consumption. And again, we're going to talk about the specifics once we get into the workshop, I can point out the differences in the engine. Now, why am I taking apart engines? Who am I, right? So just a little bit of background. Believe it or not, I haven't been a lawyer my whole life. I started restoring cars probably when I was about the age of 15. So I'm going on about 30 years right now working on restoring cars. It's also how I earned money to go through college and law school and whatnot, was working on cars. So it's something I still enjoy to this day a lot. And really the law has allowed me to take something that I've always really enjoyed. I felt like I was very knowledgeable about, enjoyed the mechanical aspect about it, and apply the law to it to really help people who may not have otherwise been able to understand what the issue was and get the relief that they needed. Because we all know that where we live and our mode of transportation are two very important things that we deal with almost on a daily basis. So we're going to go downstairs. We're going to talk about oil consumption versus connecting rod bearing failure. Feel free to send us an email. I would also encourage you to visit the settlement websites. Make sure you're visiting the right settlement website. And you're going to see that you can look at your VIN. You can send us your VIN. You can ask the settlement administrator also what settlement you should be involved in. But knowing which engine you have is going to create a lot less confusion. The most recent settlement, again, the one that went out this summer, which would have been June or July, is the newer settlement. That is the non-Theta 2 settlement. The Theta 2 settlement, notice, went out about a couple years ago. I believe it was during 2021. So, and then also just generally a big overview: oil consumption versus connecting rod bearing failure. Typically, this is not always the case, but typically, and again, we've talked to thousands of people and torn a lot of these engines apart. What's going to happen in connecting rod bearing failure is it's going to be sudden and unexpected, absent the KSDS update. That will obviously warn you, put the car into limp mode, allow you to get to a dealership. But oil consumption is really an ongoing thing. So oil consumption, typically the vehicle can still be driven. And this is something that people battle with sometimes for a long time, where it's a year or two, they're continuing to drive the vehicle, they have oil consumption. And understandably, they're upset. Why isn't this getting repaired under the settlement? Well, it's actually not a connecting rod bearing failure. It's an oil consumption issue, which is a different issue. And under the legal theories, you can't always bring those two together, unfortunately. So we're going to go down to the workshop. I'm going to show you the engine, and we'll talk a little bit more down there. Okay, we are in the workshop of our law firm. This is where we do a lot of teardown analysis of engines. So what I have here is a Hyundai Kia Theta 2 engine. So this is a 2.4 liter. It's in a lot of Hyundai and Kia vehicles. I left the dipstick on here for orientation so you can see how the engine is within your engine compartment. This is a 4-cylinder engine, 1, 2, 3, 4 pistons, 4 combustion chambers. What I'm going to do is just run through general overview of how the engine works. What I've done here is the cylinder head has already been removed. I've removed a lot of the accessories off of the engine as well. So really the only thing that we're looking at right now is a short block. And my goal here is to really just explain the difference, the general understanding of how the engine works, but then the general difference of oil consumption versus connecting rod bearing failure in these engines. Okay, so as you can see, we have 4, these are the tops of the pistons. We have 4 of them going across. 2 are in the same position right there. The other 2 are in a different position, but also the same as one another. The reason for this is that within the engine, you have pistons, or let's call it the combustion process, fires at different points in time. And really you want that to be going on so that the power that you're feeling while you're driving the vehicle is really comfortable. If all the pistons were to fire at the exact same time, you'd have a delay between the power, and it'd be not smooth at all when you're driving the vehicle. So a lot of times you'll have engines that have more cylinders. Those cylinders will fire at even different times, and then the engine in theory will be smoother. Now, again, engine principles, there's a lot that factors into that. You get into performance things, and that can really change a lot. But what I want to do is just talk about the overall theory of how this engine works. So what happens is you're going to have the pistons are connected to connecting rod, which is connected to a crankshaft below. So when the engine turns, you can see the pistons and how they move. And we're going up and down in the combustion chamber. So this one, for example, it's going to go back down now. Now that's called the intake. So at that point, it's taking in air and also fuel. It's going to go to the bottom. It's going to start coming back up. Now this, and I'm just focusing just on that one. That piston right now is going to start essentially the compression phase of the cycle. So it's going to start compressing the air and the fuel within the combustion chamber, which is right here, which would be with the cylinder head. And then there's a spark plug there. So the spark plug is just waiting. And then once it gets to the top where you have the air and the fuel that's all compressed within the combustion chamber, then the spark plug is going to ignite the fuel. And then once that happens, there's a mini explosion. The piston's now sent back down. That's during the power cycle. So right there, the piston is making power, turning the crankshaft, which goes through the transmission, which then drives your tires. It goes again to the bottom. It's going to come back up. And this phase right now, when it's coming back up, it's pushing out all of the burnt exhaust gases, which is called the exhaust phase. So then it's pushing the gases out of the tailpipe. So during that phase, there's a lot that is happening in order for this piston or each one of these pistons to be able to produce power to the rear wheels or to the front wheels in a Hyundai Kia. Essentially 4 cycles that it has to go through to generate power. So as you can see, the top of these pistons, it's a dark colored. See, it's like a soot. Well, what happens is during this process, you need oiling, right? You need engine oil. If you don't have engine oil, the engine's going to seize because the engine oil reduces the friction. So what will happen is the engine gets oiled. You have underneath the engine is a oil pan. That's where the oil is stored. There's an oil pump that circulates the oil throughout the engine. And a lot of times what we see is you're going to have oil consumption. If someone does have an oil consumption issue, the oil consumption is actually going to take place inside the combustion chamber. So what happens is oil will slip by the side of the piston during this process. Oil gets into here, it gets burnt up, goes out the exhaust, but there's also oil remnants left in here. And those oil remnants will foul your spark plug. So sometimes people get a code for like a knock, a misfire, something like that. You can also pull the spark plugs out and look at them. And if they're very dark colored with oil, there's a good chance there could be oil consumption. Another one is the catalytic converter. During the exhaust phase, when the oil is pushed out through the exhaust with the exhaust gases, you can actually have the catalytic converter that gets poisoned by the oil consumption. So people say, well, why isn't oil consumption covered in the lawsuit? And the reason is it's a completely different part of the engine. We deal with a lot of different legal theories, legal standards that are required for class actions. And so when you get into different parts of the engine, it differs from other failures within the engine, and that becomes near impossible to what's called certify as a class action. So they're 2 totally different types of failures. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the engine over. I'm going to show you what the underneath side looks like, and then we're going to take out one of these pistons so you can see the rings of the piston and how that works on the combustion chamber to help with each ring serves a different purpose, but really to see how that helps with oil consumption and then also what may be an issue with oil consumption. Flip it over so you can see the underneath of this. All right. So here's the underneath of the engine. I've removed the oil pump assembly that was there from the factory. And the crankshaft runs through here, and then underneath the piston, you're going to have the connecting rod, and these are the bottom portion of the connecting rod. Again, if we spin this, you can see them moving like that, as well as my engine moving a little bit on the stand. You can see it moving like that. So what we're going to do is we'll go ahead and take one of these out and we'll take it apart a little bit, and I'll explain a little bit further about what's going on inside the engine. Engine turned upside down. Now we're going to take off the connecting rod bearing caps. Now I've not taken this motor apart, this specific motor apart. So sometimes they give you a little bit of trouble, but we'll open it up together and see what it looks like. There's a bolt holding one side of a connecting rod together. Now we'll go ahead and take the piston and the connecting rod out. Again, I'm going to use this. We're not going to reuse this engine, but you wouldn't do something like this on an engine that you're going to reuse. You wouldn't want to risk scratching the combustion chamber. Okay, and then that's it. There's a connecting rod, the piston. This is the second half or the bottom half of the connecting rod, which would go around the crankshaft like that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Okay, so we have our piston and our connecting rod that's pulled out of the engine now. Take a closer look at this. Like I talked about before, when I took it out of the engine, the bottom portion of that connecting rod is going to bolt onto the top portion of the connecting rod. That's going to go around the crankshaft. Crankshaft's going to go in there. These two bolts are going to hold it on. In there, we're going to have the connecting rod bearings. The connecting rod bearing would go just like that. And the fact that it's named a bearing, it does probably exactly what you think it does, which is to minimize the friction between the crankshaft and the connecting rod during the rotating process, or the combustion cycles when the crankshaft is spinning. And so, like we talked about before a little bit, we have the rings that are at the top of the piston. This is the piston head. There's going to be rings. Your combustion cylinder walls are on the side. The piston will go up and down in the combustion chamber. These two top rings right here, really the whole purpose of those two top rings is to keep the gases in those two top rings right there, keep the gases within the combustion chamber. Because really what's happening is the combustion chamber is an explosion, right? So it compresses the gases, which is the air and the fuel. And then when the spark plug ignites, it creates a little explosion. And that explosion pushes the piston down. And when it pushes the piston down, it turns the crankshaft. And when the crankshaft turns, then that generates power, which then turns the gears in the transmission, which then changes or turns the tires on the road. So it allows us to go, generates movement. Okay, so then the third ring that we see on the piston head, that's called the oil control ring. And you can see this is pretty gunked up. And so the oil control ring, the whole purpose of the oil control ring is as the piston's moving up and down, you're going to have oiling within the combustion chamber. The oil control ring will wipe the edge of the combustion chamber, bringing the oil back down to the crankcase. And that's really where you want it to be, because the oil will be picked up by the oil pickup, circulated throughout the engine, will go through the oil filter, and you don't want to have the oil being burnt up in the combustion chamber. Although it's not abnormal for a minimum amount of oil to be burned up during the process. The problem becomes when you're fouling spark plugs, you're getting a lot of gunk within the combustion chamber on top of the piston head. If it's creating issues with the catalytic converter, if you're seeing smoke out the back, reducing power, anything like that, that's all problematic with oil consumption. So in the connecting rod, we have the connecting rod bearings. The connecting rod bearings, like we talked about, minimize the friction. You can see here we're starting to see copper come through. Those bearings have definitely seen some wear. And so typically what I see in these engines are when these bearings start to wear, you'll have a sudden stalling. And so the sudden stalling event can happen a couple different ways. The engine can just seize up, someone gets it towed to the dealership, or if these connecting rod bearings are worn enough, then what can happen is that it can cause a space between the connecting rod and the crankshaft, where this can get thrown off balance enough that the piston or the connecting rod can actually make a hole in the side of the engine block. And that's obviously not a good thing either. But the whole point of this is I really just wanted to show the difference in terms of the two engine questions that I see very frequently is, do I have connecting rod bearing failure, or do I have engine oil consumption? And as you can see, they're actually in two totally different spots. The reasons that for them are very different. We allege some defects in the class action lawsuit. I'm not going to get too much into it here, but they are two totally different issues. The biggest thing that I can say that really helps with the oil consumption, and it even helps with the connecting rod bearing and just prolonging the life of the engine, is to really stay on top of the maintenance of these engines. Defer to the owner's manual, but you really got to check the oil frequently. You want to make sure that it looks good. It's not a dark colored, dirty colored. If you can see, any kind of metal debris in it, that's not good as well. So really stay on top of the maintenance. That's going to help you prolong these engines a lot. Hopefully this helps. Feel free to send us an email or visit our website or the settlement website as well to help answer any questions.